I presume you would agree it was a monstrous crime. You've always challenged the notion that you yourself are a monster. Professionals have said you're a psychopath.
Yeah, so he says here that, people shouldn't be judged, I guess, by their mistakes. I think that's dependent on the mistake.
I have been able to forgive Paris for the worst thing imaginable, but I am never going to be comfortable with it. Those are the words of Charity Bennett, a mother speaking about her son, a son who took the life of her daughter. What you are about to hear is a true story. The events discussed involve real people, real families, and real consequences. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. You are standing in the kitchen of a small house in Abilene, Texas. It is the evening of February 4th, 2007. Super Bowl Sunday. Somewhere across town, restaurants are packed, televisions are glowing blue in every living room, and an entire city has settled in for the biggest night of the football calendar. In this house, a babysitter is gathering her coat. A 4-year-old girl is somewhere nearby, small and sure-footed, the kind of child who fills a room before she even speaks. Her 13-year-old brother stands in the doorway. He is calm, measured. He tells the babysitter their mother will be home soon. He tells her he is responsible enough to handle things until then. Neither of those things is true. The babysitter leaves, the front door closes, and for the next several hours, only 2 people remain inside that house. By midnight, one of them will be gone forever. A 911 call comes in from the home late that night. Then, minutes later, another, more frantic than the first. A third call follows soon after, the boy's voice cracking, pleading with the dispatcher for help.
I want you to start CPR, okay?
No, I know for a fact that she's dead because
do you want to go ahead and try? It might still help, okay?
No, I don't think it'll help. No, I don't think it'll help.
3 calls. 3 windows into a night that was already unraveling long before anyone outside that house understood what was actually happening inside it. Outside, the street is quiet. Porch lights glow over empty driveways. Somewhere down the block, a television flickers with the sound of a crowd roaring over a touchdown, oblivious. Inside this one house, none of that matters anymore. It would matter later, more than anyone could have predicted. Before we open the case file, tell me where you're watching from tonight. Every city, every country, every perspective matters to this community. And if you're new here, consider subscribing to Detective Shelb, because tonight's case is one of the most disturbing in the history of American juvenile crime. And it deserves to be told carefully, and told right. Her name was Ella Bennett. She was 4 years old. Born on April 12th, 2002, in Abilene, Texas, to a single mother named Charity, who had been raising her older brother Paris largely on her own since his birth in 1993. Charity remembers the moment she first placed baby Ella into Paris's arms. She was watching closely, waiting to see how a 9-year-old boy would react to suddenly becoming a big brother. He looked down at the baby in his arms, broke into a wide, unguarded smile, and told his mother she was beautiful. It is a memory Charity has returned to many times since, turning it over and over, trying to reconcile the boy in that memory with the one who sat across from detectives years later. Ella was, by every account from the people who loved her, a force of nature. She was loud in the best way, opinionated, the kind of child who said exactly what was on her mind, whether anyone asked her to or not. She wanted to be a singer someday. She had a ball pit set up in the house that she treated like her own personal broadcast studio, narrating her days to an imaginary audience with total, unshakable confidence, announcing herself on camera the way a seasoned news anchor might open a segment. She idolized her older brother. Anything Paris did, Ella wanted to do too. He picked out her outfits most mornings. Family members would later describe him, almost fondly, as her personal fashion consultant. In home videos, the two of them performed little skits together, Paris behind the camera, Ella in front of it, completely unafraid of the lens, narrating pretend news reports from her bedroom floor and her ball pit alike, treating every corner of their small house like a stage built just for her. As the two children grew, Charity couldn't help but notice how different they were from one another. Ella was lively, spunky, endlessly social, capable of lighting up an entire room the moment she walked into it. Paris was quieter, more introverted, more content in his own head than in a crowd. To Charity, watching them together, it never once looked like anything other than two very different kids who loved each other deeply despite those differences. Paris himself had shown early signs of being an unusually gifted child. By 6 years old, growing up in Abilene, Texas, he was already excelling in school, testing at an IQ of 141, adored by his teachers and well-liked by his classmates. To his mother, in those early years, he seemed like the perfect child, and together, the two of them felt like the perfect family, even without a father in the picture. That absence was not a small detail. Paris's own father had suffered a severe psychological breakdown before Paris was even born, leaving a young, pregnant Charity to raise a child entirely on her own, with little support from her own mother, Kyla. Rather than breaking under that weight, Charity says she poured everything she had into her son, determined to give him a stability and a steadiness she herself had never fully had growing up. 4 years later, that family of two became a family of three. For years, that was the story of this family. A single mother working 2 jobs to keep them afloat. A gifted, quiet older brother who mostly kept to himself, content with a book or a sketch pad. A bright, spirited younger sister who could talk to anyone. A family of 3, holding on to each other because, for most of their lives, each other was all they had. It would matter later, more than anyone could have predicted. By the early evening of that Super Bowl Sunday, Charity Bennett was already at work, pulling a double shift at a local sports bar, one of the busiest nights of the year for anyone in the restaurant industry. She had hired a babysitter to look after her children, so she could work through the game and the after-hours rush that would follow it. Later that night, Paris convinced that babysitter to leave early. He told her their mother was coming home sooner than planned. He told her that at 13 years old, he was old enough to watch his little sister in the meantime. The babysitter, with no reason to doubt a well-spoken, responsible-seeming teenager, agreed and went home. Both of the things he told her were untrue. A few minutes later, the 2 children were alone in the house. At 11:42 p.m., a 911 operator answered a call from that address. On the other end was a 13-year-old boy, seemingly frantic, his words tumbling over each other between what sounded like sobs. He told her his little sister wasn't breathing. The operator did exactly what she was trained to do. She kept her voice steady. She began walking him through the steps of CPR, counting compressions out loud, reassuring him that help was on the way, that he was doing the right thing, that every second mattered. Here is what she did not know. She believed she was guiding a terrified teenage boy through the most important minutes of his life, coaching him through chest compressions on his baby sister, racing against a clock that still had time left on it. It didn't. Here is what the responding officers did not know as they sped through the dark, quiet streets of Abilene that night. Lights cutting through a town that was otherwise wrapped up in a football game. They believed they were racing toward a medical emergency, a chance, however slim, to save a 4-year-old girl. They weren't. Here is what the paramedics riding alongside them did not know, running through the mental checklist every first responder rehearses before walking into a call like this one. Airway, breathing, circulation. The same 3 priorities repeated silently over and over in the seconds before arrival. There was no checklist that could have prepared them for what they were about to find. When officers finally arrived and made their way to Ella, they found her lying face down, There were no signs that anyone had performed CPR on her at all. For the entire length of that 911 call, while a trained operator counted out compressions and pleaded with him to keep going, Paris Bennett had only been pretending. Charity was still at the bar, unaware, when police walked through the front door that night and asked to speak with her by name. They didn't tell her anything there. They told the manager. They told her only that she needed to come with them immediately. In the patrol car, her mind raced through every possibility except the right one. As they pulled onto her own street, she saw what no parent should ever have to see. Her home wrapped in caution tape, patrol lights washing over the neighborhood in red and blue, news vans already arriving, and a crowd of strangers and neighbors gathering at the edge of her own front yard. She begged the officers to just tell her, and they finally did. Her daughter was dead. Charity watched as Ella's body was carried out of their home in a body bag, zipped to her chin, blood visible near her mouth. In that moment, she says, all she could do was scream that she was sorry she hadn't been there. Then, she remembers, she simply collapsed. It was only afterward, gathering whatever strength she had left, that she thought to ask about her son. Where was Paris? Was he safe? Officers told her he was already at the police station, unharmed. For one brief, involuntary moment, relief cut through the horror. Her son was alive. But as she rode toward the station to be reunited with him, something felt wrong. A coldness in the air she couldn't name. And underneath that coldness was something else entirely, a feeling she recognized. Because this was not the first time violence had torn through Charity Bennett's family. Here is what almost no one in that police station understood that night. Charity had lived through a version of this exact horror before, in a completely different form 3 decades earlier. Cobb County, Georgia, 1980. Charity was just 6 years old. Her parents, James and Kyla, ran a successful national trucking company, moving cargo across the country in an industry worth billions of dollars a year. But behind the money and the success, their marriage had been falling apart for years, and by early 1980 they had already divorced. Then, unexpectedly, they reconciled. On March 9, 1980, they flew to Las Vegas and remarried in a whirlwind ceremony. For a moment, 6-year-old Charity allowed herself to hope her family had found its way back to stability. Less than 3 days later, on March 11, 1980, her father James was found dead in the family home. Investigators documented 3 gunshot wounds to the head, the heart, and the back. This was not a burglary gone wrong. This was, unmistakably, a targeted killing. Suspicion fell almost immediately on Kyla, the newly remarried widow. Her name had just been reinstated in James's will days before his death, meaning that if he died, she stood to inherit the entire company and his fortune. Investigators explored whether the killing had been carried out as a professional hit tied to organized crime, given the scale and reach of the family's shipping business. Rumors spread through Cobb County that Kyla had allegedly discussed paying $50,000 to have her husband killed. When detectives questioned her directly about a murder-for-hire arrangement, Kyla admitted she had asked about the idea, but insisted it had only ever been out of curiosity, nothing more. With no other strong leads and no murder weapon ever recovered, prosecutors spent the next 4 months building their case against her before finally taking her to trial. For 11 days, a jury listened to the evidence and the allegations and the considerable gaps between them. Prosecutors argued the financial motive was too significant to ignore. The defense countered that curiosity about a life insurance-style arrangement was not the same as ordering an execution, and that no physical evidence tied Kyla directly to the killing itself. In the end, the verdict came back: not guilty. Kyla walked out of that courtroom a free woman. The killer was never officially identified. The weapon was never recovered. and Kyla returned to a life of wealth and total control over the family business, raising Charity largely on her own from that point forward, insisting for the rest of her life that she had been framed. Charity grew up in the shadow of an unsolved murder and a mother the whole town believed had gotten away with it. Classmates taunted her outright, telling her, in her own words, that they'd heard her mummy killed her daddy. At home, she has said, she often felt neglected, as her mother slid into a lifestyle of drinking and drug use while running the company, with little time or attention left over for a grieving little girl. The pressure of that childhood, the loss of her father, the whispers that followed her through school, and the years of loneliness inside her own home eventually caught up with her. By her own account, Charity spent 4 years in her late teens and early 20s struggling with an addiction of her own, searching for any way to quiet the noise that had followed her since she was 6 years old. At 18, she made the decision to get clean, and she did. From there, she rebuilt her life with real intention. She earned a university degree in family development psychology, drawn to the very subject that might have helped explain what had gone wrong in her own childhood home. Her sense of purpose deepened further when she learned she was pregnant with her first child, a baby boy. It felt at the time like the start of an entirely new chapter, one that had nothing to do with the trauma that came before it. But even with a new career, a new family, and a new sense of direction, Charity has said she was never able to fully heal from what she went through as a young girl. The relationship with her own mother remained complicated for the rest of her life, and the pain of her father's unsolved murder never fully left her, sitting quietly in the background of an otherwise hopeful new life, waiting for a moment to resurface. She had Paris. Years later, she had Ella. For a long time, she believed she had finally broken the cycle that had defined her own upbringing. She hadn't. Now, 3 decades after watching her own mother sit across from detectives as a murder suspect, Charity Bennett was walking into a police station to see her son, the only person investigators considered a suspect in her daughter's death. When she finally reached him, she says the only thing she felt in that first moment was relief. He was the only one she had left. She wrapped her arms around him and cried, and cried, and kept crying. And then she realized he wasn't hugging her back.
And when I saw him, the only thing I felt was so happy to see my child. Because he was the only one left. I started hugging him and just cried forever. And then I realized at some point that he wasn't hugging me back. And that's when everything stopped making sense.
If you've made it this far, thank you. Cases like this take weeks of research, court records, and careful verification to tell responsibly. And this channel only keeps existing because of the people who choose to stay through the hard parts. If stories like this matter to you, subscribing to Detective Shelb is genuinely the only way to help us keep bringing you true and even heartwarming stories like this one, so we can keep giving cases like Ella's the care and the truth they deserve. In the hours and days that followed, as detectives began piecing together the timeline of that Super Bowl Sunday, a picture emerged that had nothing to do with a chaotic accident, and everything to do with a plan. The dismissal of the babysitter under a false pretense, the false claim about her mother's early return, the staged, tearful 911 call, the faked CPR performed for an operator who had no way of knowing it was theater. Investigators would later determine that everything Paris did that night, from the moment the babysitter's car pulled out of the driveway, appeared designed to buy him time alone with his sister, and then to construct a story for everyone who came looking afterward. For a brief period before the full picture came into focus, there was uncertainty in that house, the kind investigators are trained never to skip past, no matter how quickly a case seems to resolve. The The first possibility investigators had to rule out was the simplest one, an accident. Young children fall, they choke, they injure themselves in ways that, in a split second of panic, can look far worse than they initially are. If this had been an accident, the physical evidence at the scene would tell a very different story than the one that was unfolding. The second possibility was an intruder. Had someone else been inside that home that night, unseen by either sibling, gone before police ever arrived? It is the possibility every investigator has to consider in a case involving a child left home with only a minor to supervise them. Doors, windows, points of entry, all of it had to be checked, however briefly.
What I want you to do is take her off the bed.
No, I know for a fact that she's dead because
Do you want to go ahead and try? It might still help, okay?
No, I don't think it'll help because...
Come on, Paris, work with me. Paris,
Yes?
take her off the bed and put her on the floor.
Okay, hold on.
What I want you to do is I want you to put your hands on her chest, okay? And I want you to push 30 times. I want you
Or that theory could be set aside. The third possibility was the one nobody wanted to consider first, and the one that ultimately explained everything else. That the only two people in that house that night were the only two people who could have been responsible for what happened to Ella. The physical evidence at the scene, combined with the account Paris himself had given, and the total absence of any sign of forced entry or a struggle involving anyone outside the two siblings, closed the first two explanations quickly. There was no accident. There was no intruder. There was no other suspect. There never really had been. Charity confronted her son directly. She told him she no longer believed his story, that she believed he had killed his sister on purpose. By her account, something shifted in him instantly. The tears, the fear, the helplessness, all of it disappeared at once, as if a performance had simply ended because the audience no longer mattered. She says he looked at her and laughed. Looking back, Charity has spent years turning over the small moments from Paris's childhood, searching for anything she might have missed. An intelligent, quiet boy with a measured IQ of 141. A child who excelled in school and was adored by his teachers, who spent his free time reading and drawing rather than roughhousing with other kids. A boy who, by his mother's own recollection, got along with his little sister the overwhelming majority of the time. The kind of sibling friction most families would consider completely, boringly normal. There was no single red flag. No single incident anyone could point to afterward and say, "There, that was the warning." Which is, in its own way, one of the most unsettling parts of this entire case. Paris Bennett did not look like a warning sign. He looked like a good kid. This is where a case like this exposes a genuine gap in the systems meant to protect children. Schools are built to catch academic struggle. Pediatricians are built to catch physical illness. But the specific, quiet emergence of psychopathic traits in a child, traits that can coexist with excellent grades, good manners, and real affection for a sibling, most of the time, is not something any teacher, coach, or family member is typically trained to recognize. There was no system failure in the sense of a report that got lost or a warning that got ignored. The failure, if there was one, was broader than that. It was a society-wide blind spot around what early psychopathy in a child can actually look like from the outside. Which is to say, it can look like almost nothing at all.
She was in a body bag. It was zipped up to her chin. She had blood coming out of her mouth. I started screaming that I was sorry, that I wasn't there. They took her away. And then I just remember just collapsing.
After 6 days after Ella's death, on February 10th, 2007, The small town of Abilene gathered at a local church to say goodbye to her. Family, friends, and members of a community that had followed the story since the night the news trucks first lit up the Bennett family's street came together to remember a girl who, by every description, brought life into every room she entered. The town's grief quickly curdled into something else, judgment, and most of it was aimed not at Paris, but at Charity. She describes being approached by strangers in stores who recognized her, pointedly asking what books her son read, what video games he played, as though somewhere on his bookshelf or in his game collection, there had to be an explanation, and somewhere behind that explanation, a mother to blame. Even the most mundane parenting choices, she has said, were suddenly treated as evidence. A book he had checked out from the school library, a video game a friend had lent him. Every ordinary detail of an ordinary childhood was picked apart and re-examined as though it should have predicted the unthinkable. She says the community treated her as though she had created a monster, as though 13 years of ordinary parenting had somehow manufactured this outcome, when nothing in that ordinary parenting had ever suggested it was coming. It is worth naming plainly what this reflects. A pattern seen again and again in cases involving juvenile offenders, where a grieving, blameless parent becomes an easier target for a community's anger than the far more uncomfortable, unanswerable question of how a child came to be capable of something like this in the first place. What almost none of them knew was that Charity was living through a form of grief with no script anyone could hand her. She had not simply lost one child. In the eyes of the law, and in the eyes of her own heart, she was now the mother of a murderer and the mother of a murdered child at the exact same moment. She has described the impossible split this created. When she spoke with the district attorney's office, she had to be Ella's mother. When she spoke with Paris's defense attorney, she had to be Paris's mother. Trying to hold both roles inside her mind at once, she says, brought her right to the edge of her own sanity. Determined to actually understand what she was dealing with, rather than simply react to it, Charity requested a formal psychological evaluation of her son, a psychopath checklist youth version assessment, one of the clinical tools used by forensic psychologists to evaluate psychopathic traits in adolescence, measuring things like emotional shallowness, manipulation, lack of remorse, and impulsivity against a standardized scale. It is not a tool used casually, and it is not a diagnosis handed out lightly, particularly not for a child as young as 13. When the results came back, the assessor delivered the conclusion no parent is ever prepared to hear, that her son met the clinical markers of a sociopath. Charity has said that hearing those words did not feel like an answer so much as a confirmation of something she had already started to suspect but had no language for. A formal name finally attached to the coldness she'd felt the moment he failed to hug her back. The trial began less than a month after Ella's death. Charity remembers sitting in the middle of the courtroom, physically unable to choose a side, because both people at the center of this case were still, unbearably, her children. In the end, she made a choice that many people in her position could not have made. She chose not to walk away from Paris, but she also chose not to fight for his innocence, because there was no innocence left to fight for. She has said publicly, plainly, that her goal was never to get Paris off. It was to get Paris help and to make sure he faced real, meaningful accountability for what he had done. Throughout the lead up to trial, Charity found herself navigating a legal and emotional maze that few parents in America have ever had to walk through. She was, at once, the closest surviving relative of a murder victim, entitled to grieve and to seek justice for her daughter, and the mother of the accused, expected by the system and by her own conscience to stand by her son through his defense. There is no support group built for that specific, singular position. She has described it as a kind of isolation that even other grieving parents could not fully understand, because their loss and their love were not, as hers were, pointed at the exact same person. On August 15th, 2007, Paris Bennett pleaded guilty to capital murder in juvenile court. He received the maximum sentence available under Texas juvenile law: 40 years. There was no lengthy trial with a verdict debated for years. No lingering courtroom mystery over who committed this crime. In that narrow legal sense, this case resolved with unusual speed. But resolution and closure are not the same thing. And for Charity Bennett, closure never really came. There was no explanation from Paris that ever made sense of what he did. No confession that answered the one question every person watching this story is asking right now: why? The 40-year sentence answered the legal question. It did nothing to answer the human one, and it never will. That is the honest, uncomfortable truth this case leaves behind. Justice, in the narrowest legal sense, was served. But justice did not restore a family. It did not undo a childhood spent in the long shadow of one unsolved murder, only to collide 30 years later with a second act of violence inside the very same bloodline. And it did not give Charity Bennett anything close to a real answer for why her son became capable of what he did. There is also this, sitting quietly underneath everything else: 2 generations of the same family, 30 years apart, each left to rebuild a life in the aftermath of a violent death, with no satisfying explanation attached to it. Charity's mother was acquitted in a courtroom, and the case against her went cold, without ever being solved to Charity's satisfaction. Charity's son pleaded guilty in a different courtroom, in a different state, 3 decades later, and even that guilty plea explained the how, without ever touching the why. 2 courtrooms, 2 verdicts, the same unanswered question, passed down like something almost inherited. Before we move forward, it's worth pausing on something the record makes clear. This was never treated as an open question by the people closest to it. Charity did not spend years wondering whether her son was responsible. The physical evidence, the fabricated CPR, the dismissed babysitter, and Paris's own reaction in that interrogation room left very little room for doubt. And none of the people involved in this case, from investigators to prosecutors to Charity herself, ever suggested otherwise. What remained genuinely uncertain, and remains uncertain to this day, was never the who, it was the why. And it is a question this case was never built to answer. In the years since, Charity has kept one promise to her son without exception: that she would always love him, and that she would always try to be the best mother she could be to him, even from behind the distance a maximum juvenile sentence creates. She has said publicly that she has forgiven Paris for what he did, but forgiveness, in her words, has never meant comfort. She describes carrying both of those things at once, the forgiveness and the discomfort, as a permanent condition, rather than something time eventually resolves on its own. She has also made a second promise, one aimed outward rather than inward. On the night Ella died, Charity says she made her daughter a private promise that something meaningful would eventually come out of her death. In the years since, she founded the Ella Foundation, an organization dedicated to preventing violence by sharing her family's story and advocating for expanded access to children's mental health treatment, particularly for children showing early signs of unmanaged psychiatric conditions before those conditions escalate into something irreversible. Charity has become a public voice for a specific, uncomfortable message: that some warning signs simply do not look like warning signs at all. That a high IQ, strong grades, and a quiet temperament can exist right alongside something far more dangerous underneath, invisible to teachers, neighbors, and even a loving parent, until it is far too late to intervene. She argues that families need real, accessible mental health evaluation and treatment before tragedy forces the issue, not after. Through the Ella Foundation, that message has translated into something concrete: public speaking engagements, advocacy for earlier and more accessible psychological evaluation for children showing signs of conduct disorder or emotional detachment, and a broader push to remove the stigma families feel when they suspect something may genuinely be wrong with a child, who otherwise looks completely fine on paper. Charity has spoken openly about how isolating it felt to notice something was off long before anyone else did, and how much earlier intervention might change outcomes for other families facing a version of what she went through, if only they knew where to turn and felt safe enough to ask. If there is a single takeaway from this case, it is this: pay attention not just to behavior, but to disconnection. Emotional coldness in a child, difficulty expressing empathy in ordinary moments, resistance to accountability when something goes wrong. These are patterns worth taking seriously and discussing with a qualified mental health professional long before they have the chance to escalate. This is not a call to view every quiet, bookish child with suspicion. The overwhelming majority of quiet, intelligent, introspective kids grow into perfectly ordinary, perfectly kind adults. It is instead a reminder that help exists, that evaluation exists, and that asking for it early, even when a child seems to be doing fine by every conventional measure, can matter more than any family realizes at the time they finally decide to ask. If you are a parent, a teacher, or a relative who has noticed a pattern of emotional detachment in a child that genuinely concerns you, that concern is worth raising with a pediatrician or a licensed child psychologist. It does not mean something is definitely wrong. It means you are paying attention, which is very often the single most protective thing in a child's life. This case also raises an uncomfortable, practical question worth sitting with as a viewer. How much can any parent actually know about a child who does not want to be known? Charity worked 2 jobs. She showed up. She loved both of her children fiercely, by every measure available to her at the time. And it still was not enough to see this coming. Because what she was up against was not inattention. It was a level of concealment most parents will never have to imagine confronting. That is not a reason for guilt. It is a reason for compassion, both for Charity and for any parent quietly wondering the same thing about their own child tonight. Go back to the beginning of this story, and there is one small detail worth sitting with. Paris used to pick out his little sister's clothes every single morning. Her personal fashion consultant, Charity called him, back when that phrase only ever meant something sweet. Ella trusted him completely. She followed him everywhere, copied everything he did, believed without question that her big brother was someone who would always look out for her. The same brother who once looked down at her as a newborn and told his mother she was beautiful. Right up until the night that trust cost her everything. Somewhere in Abilene, Texas, Charity Bennett still carries both versions of her son at once. The 9-year-old boy smiling down at a newborn, the 13-year-old who laughed in an interrogation room. She has said she does not expect most people to understand how she holds both of those truths in the same heart, without one erasing the other. She simply does. It is, in its own way, the most unresolved open loop this case will ever have, and it is one that will never fully close, not in a courtroom, not in a psychological evaluation, and not in the decades Paris still has left to serve. If you stayed with me all the way to the end, leave the words, "Remember her name." It lets me know who was here for the entire story, and it reminds me that there are still people willing to sit with cases like this one and remember the children behind the headlines, long after the news vans have gone home and the courtroom doors have closed. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe to Detective Shelb, because history is not what survives on paper, it's what survives in silence.